Hey, John, thanks for joining us today. As way of getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Good morning. Thanks for having me so much. I appreciate it. So, been in sales about 20 years now. Post on LinkedIn when time permits. Seen you walking around your neighborhood for a few years. Looks like you're always in a great mood and having a good time talking about sales and taking your walks.
And why sales for you?
That's an interesting question. So, I put myself through college working retail. And I went to the University of Houston. They were really ahead of the sales game. I think they offered a specialization as a business minor in professional selling. And so a buddy that I worked with in retail was a marketing major. I was a marketing minor. He brought this certification to my attention and said, "What do you think?" I said, "Yeah, let's see if the school knows what they're talking about." And so we did this certification, and we were like, you know what, this could be a career. Really, before I think people looked at sales or maybe even software sales as a career, right? This is 1998, back when Salesforce.com was still brand new.
Yeah.
And that's actually the first time we were exposed to it was part of this business school program.
And
So parlay that into a
yeah.
career to answer the question.
And how did you judge that program now that you got 20 years in the field? How well did it prepare you?
I think it did a pretty fantastic
Yeah.
job. There was only around 30 or 40 of us in the program at the time. My understanding is they've got at least a few hundred now. I mean, it is legitimate in ways that I don't think either of us ever expected. It's something that I think you can even major in now, which is just mind-blowing to think about. The growth and the success they've had has been amazing.
But what about sales appeal to you as a person, as John?
I think it matched my personality. So I was I was on the yearbook staff in high school, and we had to sell ads to support the yearbook. And I remember getting in my mom's car and driving around our neighborhood and literally physically cold calling businesses, begging them to buy ads for the yearbook. And as a junior, I outsold all the seniors and won $100, which might have been a million when you're 17 in 1991. I was like, man, could I actually do this for a living? And I didn't. I mean, what did I know about sales in 1991 other than guys that tried to sell you vacuums at your front door, which I'm sure you remember, but a lot of your listeners probably have no no idea what I'm talking about.
But let's dig into that. What about your personality appeal to that? You seem to like it.
So I love to be out and meeting people and talking to people and getting to know people. I've always felt like sales was purely based first and foremost on relationships. I think
Yeah.
people buy from who they like. I think if you have a pretty dynamic personality and you're friendly and you can build and maintain and foster relationships, people are going to buy from you, right? Again, people buy from who they like. I certainly have tried over the years to be likable. Might not have always been successful there, depending on the sales cycle and who's on the other side of the desk. But I think it matched my outgoing personality. I think it matched my competitive nature. And as I said, I put myself through college working retail, so it's not like I came from a wealthy family, and I saw pretty early, especially just working at the Gap and Ralph Lauren in college, that if you worked really hard and you put a lot of effort into it, financially it would pay off. And that matched where I thought I needed to be long term. Um, and again, that competitive nature, I mean, I didn't play sports, but was competitive academically and through just achievements. And I could tell pretty quick that if you were competitive and likable and driven, which were some of the things that I felt like I was at the time. And I think as you get older, you realize what your strengths are and you play to those strengths as well.
Yeah. What was missing from the mix that you had to add?
Um, so learning how to memorize scripts, memorize demos, being a one-man show, because, in the early days, there was no SE, there was no PSE, there was no subject matter expert, there was no sales operations or revenue operations, and you might have had one contract lawyer who was split amongst 20 or 30 people. So you had to do all of those things on your own,
Yeah.
which presents its own set of challenges. Now, this would, again, likely be unrecognizable to the majority of your viewers and listeners because they're supported by, an army of people. But I had to learn how to do all those things on my own. My first real professional sales job was working for LexisNexis, selling law books and CD-ROMs and online legal research to lawyers, where you were physically walking in the door. And so you had to learn how to be courageous really fast, and you had to learn how to be bulletproof, because the paralegal or the secretary or the admin would promptly throw you out. And you could not let that bother you. You had to be impervious to rejection.
Now,
And
I'm
that,
noticing that about you.
what is that? Which part is that?
That impervious to rejection. And only that I don't have that. So I admire it when I see people who do, and I wonder how they get it.
Well, you get hit about the face, over and over and over again, right? You're calling on lawyers who, are educated and they have their own personality type, and you don't know who's on the other side of that door, and so you learn pretty fast in your, mid to late 20s that this is going to be difficult. And if you're starting out at 9:30 in the morning, and the first door you open
What do you
is,
do at 9:45?
yeah, get out, you can't go home, right? This will again sound really wild to some of the folks that watch, but we had a weekly quota. I mean, can you imagine? People talk about the Sunday scaries. There was nothing more terrifying than going to bed every Sunday night and knowing Monday morning you were back to zero. We had a weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual quota. And so you had to write so much business every week, to keep your job. So yeah, that was tough, and it taught you how to be impervious to rejection, how to manage transactions, how to manage pipelines. It was not easy, and it being the first job was presented its own set of challenges as well.
But it sounds like you were pretty far along building up that resilience from high school.
Sure. So, you know, when people, well, yes and no, right? When you're standing on the sales floor of the Ralph Lauren store in the Houston
It's
Galleria,
very different. It's air conditioned.
it's air conditioned, and it's, lovely surroundings, and, $5,000 custom suits, and very wealthy people coming in who are technically there, to buy made to measure suits and crocodile shoes and these kinds of things. But every once in a while you'd have someone that was just not very friendly, let's
Yeah.
say. And they're just 5 feet away from you, right? And there's nowhere to escape to. And so you learn how to build up that, being impervious to rejection. For the folks that have come in to sales during the age of Zoom, they're probably not familiar with what that looks like and feels like, right? Uh,
Well,
uh,
certainly the feeling, but it's different, right? It's
yeah, it's well, yes, that's true, right? Like you can see if someone's rejecting you on a camera.
right when no one shows or someone hangs up. There's still that.
Right, right, right. Yeah, it still does happen, but when it's physical, I think it adds an extra element,
Yeah.
right? And so when you're in a meeting and let's say this is 2019, and you're doing a demo in person live in an office, and there's 20 people in the conference room, and everyone's on their laptop, that that's them physically telling you, we are not interested, right? And so you've got to figure out a way to say, okay, everybody, right? Like, I brought in lunch here, like you kind of owe me the opportunity to pay attention. So that's a tough message to deliver. And, you asked the question, what were things you had to learn? I think another thing I had to learn was how to deliver a difficult message, a challenging message, whether that was asking people to change a process, asking people to think about things differently, asking people to look at, what was their professional existence on how they were doing things, how could we help, how could we improve. As I coached and mentored younger reps over the years, that was always something I would tell them that they had to get good at pretty fast, which is you need to become comfortable challenging people and you need to become comfortable delivering difficult messages. Like if they're asking for a bigger discount than what you've offered and you're at the end of where, sales ops, revenue ops, your VP, your manager can approve, that's it. I mean,
Yep.
everyone has to make money on the deal and you have to be comfortable saying, Sarah, we're at the end of incentives now, right? And that's also difficult, and that took some time to learn too.
And how did you internally process it? I mean, you must have been saying something to yourself. Like I tell myself, oh, it doesn't matter, move on next. But I think you've done a really good job of that early in your career with very hard things. High school with the high school yearbook, the LexisNexis.
Yeah, I think you you take the time to internalize and reflect, but you're under pressure, so you can't spend too much time,
Yeah.
right? Like you've got to keep going, you've got to keep moving, whether it's a weekly quota or a family to support or a mortgage to pay or a car note, right? You can't get bogged down on too much negativity. You've got to look at what went right this week, what went wrong, what can I do better? What did I say in a meeting that really worked? And continue to say those things. Um, but also getting comfortable with, again, delivering a tough message, asking people to think differently about how they do things, even if that forces them to take stock on maybe their process they developed over many
Yeah.
years and you're asking them to change that. It could be anything, right? Like it sounds silly to tell this story, but I remember there was a criminal defense lawyer in downtown San Antonio that I was trying to get off of books and buy a CD-ROM. Okay. And I said, you're going to the Bexar County Law Library to research cases. Those books haven't been updated in years. And he's like, oh, I don't care. I enjoy that walk to the law library. I'm like, this is
I
my
enjoy law history.
this is my competition walking to the law library. Like no one prepared me to sell against being outside. Like how do my competition is not do nothing or the other publisher. It's I like the walk to the library. And so I said, well, still take the walk, I suppose, but just know that if you spent a few $100 a month that your research is current. And he's like, yeah, I guess that's true. Plus I mean San Antonio is every bit as hot as Houston. I live in Katy, west of Houston, and I just couldn't imagine walking to the law library in June, July, August, or September in downtown San Antonio. But he seemed to love those 105-degree temperatures.
Yeah. And how did you get out of the LexisNexis into kind of enterprise sales? What was that like?
So I moved into enterprise software through Epicor, ERP, warehousing, inventory.
Easy
Uh,
stuff.
yeah, oh yeah, exactly. And selling to small to medium-sized businesses where I felt like that transition would make the most sense. And then went back to legal, selling to the general counsel at an enterprise software company where the deals were much bigger and took much longer and far more complicated. And then found my way to Workiva when it was a startup and spent 12 plus years there.
And what do you feel is your strongest selling characteristic?
Um, do you mean the type of
Well, some people are
sale?
great with questions, stories, top down, bottom up, rapport
Oh, sure.
building. things like that?
Um, so I like to get people out of the office. I am not a fan of managing the entire sales cycle over email, Zoom, Google Meet, and I see people are adding their prospects to Slack. I think all of that is fine. I think that's the core of how you run a process. But I've always felt like my strongest suit is just building relationships, as I said at the outset, and getting people out of the office, getting to know them getting to know you. You know, when you sell to legal, accounting, investor relations, they have a natural opposition, I feel, to sales reps for a variety of reasons. As a chief accounting officer told me once, she said, the only two reps I've ever liked are you and my Oracle rep. And I said, oh, well, thank you. That's very sweet. And if you get people out of the office, you get to know them, they get to know you, whether it's lunch, dinner, happy hour, breakfast, coffee, events. Um, you get to find out much more than you would in the office or over email or over the phone. And it breaks down barriers and it gives you, I think, special access to them that you otherwise wouldn't have. And due to COVID, and I think maybe just a generational shift, this has become a lost art.
It
And
is.
you might hear that or see that maybe more than I do. Um, you know, I had one of the highest credit limits on my corporate card at Workiva than anyone else in all of field sales because I wanted people out of the office. I wanted to get to know them. I wanted to build that relationship away from, you know, their cube or their desk. And that I felt was my strongest suit and led to a significant number of deals and success as well.
And it is a lost art. How did you do it? How'd you get the invite? What was the best venue for you to build that rapport with?
So I test, well, I ran a test case on how critical getting people out of the office was with a prospect they told us no many, many times. So I found an alternative contact. I invited her to lunch. It was right in front of their office. It's a place called True Lux here in Houston, which is high-end seafood. It's not inexpensive by any means. So I knew that it was close, it was high-end, and it all just made sense. And over a 12-month period, I met her for lunch once a month and found our way to one of the biggest deals of that year just by breaking down those barriers. And, you know, at the third lunch, I said, listen, you know, the other guy I was calling was incredibly resistant. And she said, oh, yes, yes, he wants to retire. He doesn't want any changes made. He can't be bothered. And he does not like you. I said,
You're
fantastic.
likable.
Yeah, she's like, well, he doesn't like you. He didn't like that you cold called him, but I love that you called me, and you know, we're going to get this to work, but it's going to take time. And I knew right away that time meant at least 9 months, and it did. It took an additional 9 months and a lot of lunches and a lot of the company's money, but it worked. And I knew then, okay, getting accountants, lawyers, whoever, IT, security, CIO, CFO, get them out of the office. Have it make sense, give it something that causes them to say yes, and just strip away those barriers that they put up and we put up. Um, and I think if you can get to know people on a professional level outside of the office, but also a personal level, it just makes a huge difference. And again, if I could train, you know, younger reps who are just starting out to embrace that, because although people are back in the office, I still think that, you know, Zoom is the default, right?
Yep.
I think if you could get them to see how much value there is in meeting people, that would be great. But I also think that a business that would make hundreds of thousands of dollars is consulting on wardrobing, because you would not want to show up in hoodie and basketball shorts. Uh, so anyway, there's that.
And you don't want to make the lunch a business meeting, meaning you don't want to be opening your laptop, talking about the product, talking about other customers, talking about your company. How do
No,
you,
yeah, so it's interesting you say that. So lunches and dinners and happy hours and things, I would lay ground rules right away. I'd let everyone get to know each other in introductions and all these things. And then I would say, okay, so I'm not a big fan of rules, but I do have a few. And my first rule is we are not going to talk shop unless you absolutely want to. There's something you need to know. I wasn't clear on something, or you're struggling internally with moving this process forward, but I did not ask you here to talk shop. So straight away, I don't want you to think about me as your sales rep. I just want you to think about me as someone you met for dinner. Second is, don't be bashful, order anything you want, right? We're here to get to know each other. You don't need to stick to water and the 6 ounce play. You can go all out, right? Um, and that always set the tone as, okay, this is different because typically
it's
you're
not quid pro quo.
right. And I did not want people to ever feel that way.
Yeah.
And prior to the lockdown, prior to COVID, man, it worked like magic.
Yes.
And then came the dark times.
And have you tried it recently or
Yes.
is it back?
I think people are still, although it's 2024, people are still trying to get comfortable, remembering what life was like prior.
It is, yeah.
And it's not as if people are in the office 5 days a week. And so it can be a little tricky. But so can getting back into in-person meetings. I mean, people are
Sure.
still not 100% comfortable with that. And, you know, that's another thing that I used to do routinely is any excuse that I could come up with, no matter how flimsy, to be in their office, man, I wanted it. Like I wanted to be there, even post-sale, just to look around, like, okay, what's the dynamic in the office? Who's who? And, is my competition in here? Those were the things that I was always concerned about.
And did other people at the company not understand this or see the value and the real meaning behind it? Did they misunderstand it?
No, I don't think so. I think everyone has their own personality type. Everyone
Style.
has
Yeah.
their own way of doing things. Um, I was, again, just raised on being in person and always wanting to be there physically and finding, this existence in a sales model just very challenging. And trying to get back into in-person everything has been critical. And for some folks, it doesn't make sense. It won't make sense. They waited their entire career for for whatever this is to come to fruition, and they love it. But yeah, I was always very active in doing social stuff, and certainly had some hair raising and eyebrow raising expense reports, but they were justified for sure.
Because it's where the magic happens. It's where people open up. It's where you start to sense the real things, like the retirement example. He would never tell you that, right?
No, never. And also, when you get to know people and they get to know you, which I think is impossible in a conference room, then they want to help you. So
Yeah.
that's another thing that I think you have to get good at is asking for help, right? Um, if you want to be successful and move things forward, and help can also come in the form of asking for them to do a reference call or asking them for referrals. Like, okay, Wendy, you've had a great experience. It's been 6 months. Who else do you know who's like you that could benefit? And maybe there's, a referral bonus that they get on their bill, but they don't care. I mean, that $5,000 on their subscription, that doesn't hit their wallet, that just hits the company. And so that's where things like, a $200 lunch just makes all the difference as you get to know people, because you can always go back and ask for their help or ask for references, referrals. And, if a deal gets stuck and you've gotten to know someone, you can go back to them and say, okay, listen, it's 6 weeks. We don't have red lines on the T's and C's. I don't want you to go ask legal again what's going on because they're already irritated with you. So why don't you just tell me who you're talking to and I'll be the bad cop. I'll call legal and say, hey, it's John with, X company, and I'm trying to find out where we are on this contract. Can you give me an update? Because I don't want Wendy to keep asking, right? And then Wendy becomes the good cop, the rep is the bad cop, which I think is pretty critical in a lot of selling scenarios. That I think has also become a lost art, right? We're taught through MEDDIC and these other sales methodologies to create a champion. And yes, I agree that that's important, but that champion has to take all the bullets. And
That's a
that is,
lot of responsibility of a champion.
yeah, it is. And that isn't fair, right? And so, I used to say to, whoever my champion was, you're going to be me inside of the organization. But when you feel like the heat's getting too hot, I don't work there. So once the deal is signed, I'm good, but you have to stay on the payroll.
Yeah.
So if you feel like things are too hot for you, you need to just tell me. And I am more than happy to call legal, call IT, call accounting, and find out where are we, right? And if they get irritated, that's okay. I don't work there. And that's not something that I think sales reps are taught. They're not taught to take the bullets. And I think you have to be willing to take those bullets.
Yeah, because they're also not aware of what that champion's going through. And if you don't have that strong rapport, are they going to tell you that legal is sitting on it, or that
Yes.
somebody in finance is naysaying it, or the CEO doesn't understand the problem?
So I learned that lesson 2011 or 12. I kept calling my champion and he's like, I don't know. I've asked and I can't get an update. So I called the VP of accounting on his cell phone before that was even a thing, right? Think about that back in 2012. One, I was shocked he answered. Two, I was shocked he didn't hang up. And I said, Al, listen, I am so sorry to bother you. No, tell me what it is. And I said, well, we cannot get red lines on the T's and C's. What do you mean? I said, well, we've been trying for weeks. And oh, nope, nope. I'm going to handle it. You'll have them in an hour. And sure enough, we did.
Yeah.
And, that was a dice roll on my part. He could have lost it. So again, I think you have to be willing to take the bullets. You have to be able to challenge and ask the tough questions and take some risks, which we haven't talked about. But I think it's inherent that, if you're in sales, you got to be okay with risky behavior.
Yeah, great. Hey, John, I really appreciate your time today. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
So I'm on LinkedIn. I post periodically. It's John Beisty on LinkedIn, Beisty. Appreciate you asking and having me. And I'd love to come back and spend however much more time you need. I'm sorry that it's shorter than anticipated.